All right, welcome to another episode of Medicine Mondays. I am yours truly, Dr. Pierre, your favorite board certified internist, founder of drbarrypierre.com, and was our host of Medicine Mondays, the Empower Yourself for Better Health series, Lunch and Learn podcast, Dr. Pierre's Health Checks, our other YouTube channel that you need to make sure you subscribe to if you're not already subscribed to. And today we're going to talk about the flu. More importantly, where is it? What do we need to worry about? And, am I going to be having to concern with things that are changing, especially here in the United States with kind of the mask related issues. So I think we should, first and foremost, we won't start at talking as if everyone knows what the flu is. We'll just assume everything's fresh, right? So the flu is caused by the influenza virus, typically here in the United States, influenza A, influenza B. It is a respiratory virus. It infects our nose, it infects the throat, lungs as well too. And the typical symptoms, right? In a normal year, obviously we're not in a normal year, this is a pandemic time. In a normal year, symptoms include shortness of breath, cough, some muscle aches, some pain, right? Those are, runny nose sometimes. Those are some of the things that when you come into the doctor's office or you come to the hospital setting and you have some of these symptoms, the flu is usually the first thing on our mind. Of course, during a pandemic time, we know the first thing on our mind right now is COVID, 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 but we must not and will not forget the flu, especially because we know it has not gone nowhere, even though the numbers may tell us a different issue. So let's talk about some fun facts for the flu that I want us to kind of drive home so we kind of understand how significant this flu was, especially when I start talking about the numbers that we're dealing with now, right? So we know that since 2010, about 45 million, that's with an M, 45 million people have been affected with the flu. We know it's resulted in about 140 to 180,000 cases of hospitalizations. That means you got so sick you actually had to come see a physician like me in a hospital setting. And about 61,000 people, right, have died from the flu. So these are just significant numbers that I think really calls home the fact that this flu was a significant and is a significant bug. And that's just the US numbers I mentioned, right? I'm not even talking about worldwide. Flu is in the top 10 worldwide killer, right, amongst the world. But here in the United States, this is the damage that the flu is causing. Now let's kind of fast forward to what we're dealing with now, just so we can kind of get an idea of like how significant, the world has changed in a year. So as we speak, at the time of my recording, we have about 600 deaths related to the flu, which is in comparison, just last year at the same time, we had about 22,000, right? Let's again, 600 deaths right now. Last year at this same time it was 22,000. We have about 2,800 cases. 2,000 cases of the flu. At this point last year, we were talking 38 million. So again, this is like this isn't like an improvement. No, this is a dramatic improvement on what we were seeing just a year ago. And I think we would be very remiss, right, not to talk about that big elephant in the room, which we definitely will talk about, the big elephant in the room and why all of these things change. But we've been talking about this before, guys. Like before the pandemic, before COVID, there were certain things that we said if you could avoid, you can, avoid having to, deal with the significant numbers that the flu was causing, right? We said if you wash your hands, we said if you social distance, like a lot of the things that we talk about, especially with this big elephant, the COVID elephant, a lot of the things that we talked about cautioning people for COVID, we also said the same thing about the flu, right? We also told you to get the vaccine, but we said if you're not going to get the vaccine, do some of these other things there. Like I remember in the hospital setting before COVID, right? If you were a employee who could not get the flu shot, or who did not want to get the flu shot, the reason why we would know is because you'd have to wear a mask. You'd have to wear a mask just all day, every day at work. So imagine the person who does not get a flu shot has to wear a mask. So why? Because that person is at risk of spreading the flu to all of their other patients that they're taking care of. So that was kind of a way that we knew, like, oh yeah, you got or you did not get the flu vaccine. And it is different at different hospitals, but that's kind of the similar stance. Like if you're going to take care of patients in a hospital, but you're not going to be vaccinated to protect yourselves from the flu, like then you need to wear a mask to protect our patients. Now, fast forward here, when we have COVID, we had this pandemic. and whose symptoms include shortness of breath, include cough, right, include some body aches and pain, among some other things, kind of similar like the flu. Now you have people saying like, all right, if you don't want to, again, you need to mask up, you need to watch, like all of these preventative measures that we had in place for COVID, we also champion them to be in place for the flu. But what we're seeing, and again, as a hospital physician, I have not diagnosed one. Again, obviously, I'm a small subset, of course, because I'm only one doctor. But like in the case of the prior years that I've been taking care of patients, especially here in South Florida, like I used to run into the flu all the time. I myself have not diagnosed one person with the flu, right, since this flu season started, which typically is around August, September, usually ends around like May-ish per se, at least here in South Florida, right? Like that's usually the time frame when we're thinking about like get ready for the flu and what those nuts. So we've had just a significant decrease in just our number of cases, right? We've had a significant decrease in the number of deaths. We have a significant decrease in the number of hospitalizations. But now when we fast forward to what's starting to happen, especially here in the United States, where the mandate for wearing a mask is kind of going away, what a lot of our health professionals fear is not only that COVID will start playing a factor again, right? Which we suspect, right? We don't only suspect that COVID may start playing an issue, kind of rising back up in the population, but like respiratory viruses like the flu that have essentially kind of went away for the most part, we also expect them to kind of creep up. Like it's funny, I was in a social room, clubhouse room, and we were talking about it, and someone mentioned who's not in this country that they typically have a season as well, kind of dealing with respiratory viruses. And typically when they see this type of respiratory virus, it's usually much earlier in the year. But because of all of the masking and everything else that was occurring, as that country was, loosening up restrictions, they are starting to see that same virus that they're usually used to seeing like months prior, they're starting to see it creep up again. So I think we should be very cautious, right? Again, I've talked about this on the prior podcast, and as well as the prior video, where if you're going to not wear a mask, right, you have to understand, like, yeah, you may be protected versus COVID, but the flu is still around. And again, the flu is not going anywhere, just like I don't think COVID's going anywhere. And it's something that we need to be very wary of to like start thinking about. Like my patients, if you're in a hospital setting, if you come in with COVID-like symptoms, like I'm going to test you for the flu as well. Even though again we've been testing, right? The numbers were like kind of ridiculous as far as just the onset this year. I'm gonna see if I can pull up the numbers. So from a lab testing standpoint, 0.1% of flu tests that they've ran have been positive. 0.1, right? I mean, that's just like it's almost insane to think about. And again, majority is influenza A, influenza B, and I mean, when you just think about the numbers here, and don't get it twisted, we're still recommending you get the flu shot, right? And I want to make sure that doesn't get missed. We still expect you to get the flu shot, even though, and again, honestly, this would probably be the best time to get the flu shot because you're likely not going to come into different strains of flu that we weren't anticipating. So if any time you're going to get the flu shot, this would likely be the time to get the flu shot. And for my parents out there, those with kids, we've only had one case of a pediatric death associated with the flu. When I tell you that us masking up against COVID, us washing our hands against COVID, us social distancing against COVID, when I tell you the dramatic effect it's had on the flu, like the numbers really speak for themselves. And like the CDC mentions, like everything is unusually abnormally low as far as incidence is concerned. Like, we are going to have the lowest once this flu season is done, we are going to have the lowest incidence of deaths, the lowest incidence of cases, the lowest incidence of hospitalizations, like, in a decade plus. Like, that is going to happen. Like, if you look at some of these graphs here, like I was looking at New York Times had a couple of graphs where, like, it's so flat. Like, it's just a flat line as far as the number of cases, especially when we talk about in comparison to prior years. Like, we're just not seeing those cases yet. And I really do caution us here. Again, I don't want to be the scary physician, right? Screaming like bloody murder, right? But, like, I think especially here in the lunch learning community, we need to be very empowered with what could occur. Like, just like we know what is happening now. Like I said, just like I'm talking about what's happening now, we need to be empowered with what could occur if we're not careful. So if you're here, right, if you let's say you haven't gotten the flu vaccine, but and you're ready to take your mask off, understand that you're not going to only have to worry about COVID being an issue. You're going to have to worry about the flu likely being an issue. And there's other respiratory issues that come into play. Like, I've had friends who typically suffer from allergies. They haven't had any issues with their allergies. Why? Because everyone's wearing masks, everyone's social distancing, everyone's washing their hands. Everyone's doing what we've been screaming, especially from a public health perspective, we've been screaming from the rooftops. But unfortunately, COVID, our big elephant, kind of pushed everyone to finally do what we've been asking for. So I think if from a parting shot standpoint, I think this is a valuable lesson, right? And I could tell you, I'm going to be the number one person champion in this aspect. When we had to take care of COVID, right? When we had to deal with COVID, we did what we needed to do, right? We wore our masks, we washed our hands, we social distanced as much as possible. So once we do get to the other side of the pandemic, right? Once we do get to the point when we are trying to turn that corner and live our normal life, understanding all of the things that we kind of asked you to do for COVID, we may ask you to do it for the flu as well. It may not be as long, right? The severity may not be as great, but like understanding that we don't need necessary, because we didn't get 100% of people doing it now. We don't necessarily need 100% of people. Like, and again, I think that's important, right? We didn't get 100% of the people in general, like masking up, washing hands. So we didn't get that. Like, some of them were forced, but we didn't get that. Right. So if we can get to the point where if we get a good amount of people who are social distancing, washing their hands, wearing the mask if need be, to try to stop the spread of the flu, right? Like, these numbers can be replicated, right? These aren't numbers that are so far-fetched that we'll never see them again unless we take action, right? Like, that's the only way. If we want to go back to our norm is having 38 million cases of the flu at this point. Our norm is having 22,000 deaths due to the flu at this point. If we don't want to go back to that norm, like, we have to adopt some of the things that we're learning now during this pandemic. And that's all I'm asking for, right? So again, I am yours truly, Dr. Pierre, your favorite board certified internist. I'm going to check you out next week.